The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, Tech Bites is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
So Rob Grimes with the IFBTA, and this is a special episode because, as people know, we have a partnership with many different events, associations, media, and this falls under one of those things I think that is cross paths and a partnership in many different areas. But I'd like to introduce Danny Klein, the editorial director of QSR FSR, and in another week, we're going to actually be going to the QSR Evolution Summit. So welcome, Danny.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's, as you know from all the events you go to, it is crazy how fast it comes and then how quickly it goes. So
I feel bad for you today because you happen to be the guest on here, and I suspect that usually you're actually the moderator and the host because I see a lot of postings by you online.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but I actually prefer this side sometimes. It is nice to get on the other aisle, I guess, so to speak. So it's fun for me to go and talk, especially if we're talking about the events.
Well, there are so many events that are out there in the world. And, like the IFBTA, when we're working across events and across industries, you take, times three because you got hospitality events, food service events, retail events, and then you got all the hybrid stuff and you got the tech stuff for us. So why don't you tell us a little bit about not only QSR Evolution, but also the Next Gen Restaurant Summit that's going to be going alongside of that?
Yeah, sure. I could kind of start at the beginning. So this is actually year 2. Last year was the first year we decided to get onto the conference circuit after not having an event for, I think it was 15 years, something like that. We had never had an event in the time that I had been there, at least, and then made that decision to launch a conference, which was both great and, of course, has turned my life upside down in a lot of ways. But when we were sitting at that moment, what we wanted to do. So, of course, we have 2 properties. We have a quick service magazine in QSR, which has been around since 1997, and then FSR, which I believe is on its 13th year. So how do we put those together? So QSR Evolution, I would say, is the sort of the anchor of the event itself. It's the larger portion, as the QSR industry tends to be. And then Next Gen Restaurant Summit is the full service track within the conference itself. So what you end up having is 5 tracks, I believe, 5 or 6. Hard to keep track at this point, of content happening at once.
Hard to keep track of tracks?
That's hard to keep track of tracks. So I think it's 5. Basically, you have your Next Gen Restaurant tracks, which are the full service categories. So the operators who talk on those panels are mostly emerging full service chains. That's the Next Gen branding. And then QSR, of course, are QSR folks. So that's what you end up with, which is a very, very content forward conference. I think we have 150 something speakers. Last year we had 159. I believe we're about that same number. I have not actually counted, but it is within that same universe. So lots of things happening at once. One of the complaints we got last year was that there was too much, content going on simultaneously for people to take in. But when we were looking at that afterward, I didn't really think it was a negative. So while I appreciate the feedback and the commentary on it, I actually thought that was a compliment. So
was some of the content also available digitally after the fact if people aren't able to attend, or how's that work?
Yeah, the answer to that question on the simple form is no. We do get recordings and we have videos of the keynotes, but we don't release them because we'd like it to be a separate thing that you have to come do. And and it's just from a logistical standpoint of the production, it wouldn't really play the same way. It would be very hard to follow a 6-person panel on the audio. So you have to come to Atlanta to get the content. We will cover it a little bit in the magazine, but
Well,
Yeah,
I was going to
yeah,
say that, by the way. I was going to say that, of course, you don't want to give it out to those who don't attend because there's two uses of it. One is people should attend, okay, and then the
correct.
second part of it is it makes for great editorial coverage later on, because you're really well, in my view, this is perfect timing for this because you're really kicking off the fall budget season and everything that people are thinking about for next year. So you're able to use that also to help guide the industry through your editorial side.
That is a good question. I think I was talking about also just some of the keynotes being kind of exclusive to being there. Like last year, for example, we had a keynote where the CEO of Chick-fil-A gave that, and that was intended entirely for that format and not for any other. And so that's one of the things about conferences that we have to take into account is that some of it you really should attend to get the way it is. I'm pulling up the tracks right now for you. Okay, so on the QSR evolution side, the tracks are fast casual, the next act, which is essentially the future of
Yeah,
fast casual.
got it.
Yeah. Operations, again, very broad and concept of sort of the nitty gritty of running restaurants. Something that we call take the lead, which is fireside chats. So we just basically put a label on the one-on-one conversations that we have throughout the event.
Is that the one you and I are doing?
Yes, exactly. And the front lines of franchising. So, that's self-explanatory in terms of what that is. Where we have a very, very large franchise audience who both reads QSR and attends. So that's to kind of reflect that. And on the next gen side, we have a F&B into the future track and the experience economy track. So those are your two over there. Which I'm realizing the website's a little weird while I'm looking at this, but we're only a week away, so I'm not fixing it at this point.
But this is really totally under what you're managing and doing.
Oh yeah, well, so that's one of the really interesting things about our two events. So when I was looking at that moment, and I tried to think, okay, well, it's a very crowded event circuit. I go to a lot of them. There's some I obviously don't go to, being on this media side that I'm on. But how could we go about it doing a little differently than what I've experienced? Also, just to reflect who we are. It isn't so much taking a look at something we don't like and going the other way, but how could we be very much QSR in this process? And so what we did at the heart of that was we set the agenda and the speaker lineup and all the content ahead of time. So myself, the other editors, we meet, we get that going, we start asking speakers. It's a one-to-one process that takes, we began in November, and then we show it to vendors. So the vendors and the partners and the suppliers and everyone who makes this conference possible, they don't actually see any of the content until it's already finished on an editorial side. And so how that's different, and I'm not knocking the other model, it's just that they come into the situation afterwards. So instead of having the ability to say, pick a track on AI and then bring four their customers to the panel and have that discussion that way. That is the difference in how we are. So what you might end up doing as a vendor if you sponsor our AI track is you might end up on a panel with three competitors. Or you might end up, it's
yeah,
very
because
different.
you've so what you're saying is you've already lined up not only the speakers, not only the subjects, but also the people who are on the panel.
Correct. So,
and then you bring it back, and then you're trying to match the two up. So your content first, and
correct.
So that would lead to the question then, that means that you are in fact setting the trends and choosing what the topics are. Now, you obviously have editors who stay in touch with what's going on in the field, but how do you make sure then, because you're forward thinking, this is next generation, right? So, and it's evolution, right? So how do you stay in front of it to ensure if you're starting in November for something that's going to occur in September, how do you have the right subjects? You're predicting the future.
Well, one of the ways that we do that is like when I was reading the tracks out to you before, you got to keep them a little bit general so that you can adjust. So like a good example of that is this dynamic pricing panel that we set. So at the time that we were setting that, it was the biggest thing out there. You had this Wendy's thing going.
Right.
And so now if you look at it, obviously it's changed.
You must have been setting that panel in a week, because the Wendy's thing was going on for about 3 days and then it wasn't going on.
Right. I know.
It must have hit right in that week.
Yeah, well, we were writing about it a lot for about a month there. And so when we went to set the tech topics, we're like, oh, we need something on dynamic pricing. So now if you go at this point, we were doing the checks on what that was going to look like. And everyone on the panel, we're like switching kind of exactly what is it even dynamic pricing necessarily? It's kind of a
right
revenue management. There's like 5 different topics happening within that panel now. So you have to be agile. I mean, that's also one of the things about the editorial version of the speaker lineup is that people are not really beholden to talk about anything specifically. They're really free to do whatever they want, which, they don't have to kind of come on a panel with a specific vendor and feel the need to kind of speak about that experience.
But they need to be flexible enough to be able to talk about the subject and pivot as well.
Right. And they are. I mean, that's, and we end up in a scenario where, things change, the lineup changes, some people move around. But you are trying to kind of predict the future, and it's not a perfect science, especially with the technology topics. I mean, we ended up with one on AI, which, at the time, again, was everywhere. I would say it's still being talked about. It's not as though it's not, but what did that exactly mean? Because there's so many different forms of it. And so we left it out there a little bit to be changed. But the simple answer to that question is there is no way you can really do that. You're taking your best guess at what seems to be important.
Do you involve outsiders in the conversation of the subjects? Do you involve the operator community or
Yeah, what we did this year, which we didn't have the luxury of doing last year when we were launching a conference sort of from the shadows. A lot of the topics this year came from the post-survey data from last year.
Right.
So we took a look at what people wanted. The main feedback I got was that people really wanted some topics that got into the trenches of the subject. And so if you look at our franchising track in particular, we have very, very, dialed down things that would only apply or appeal to you if you were very interested in franchising. And that was kind of the point. So we have something on deciphering the FDD, which was a direct request from somebody. And so deciphering the FDD is not...
So if you don't know what an FDD is, you shouldn't attend that track.
Correct. So like last year, we had a lot of topics that would just be something like future franchising. And so we got this
very
feedback.
General.
Yeah. So the feedback was to kind of be less general on some of those. So we did that. We have one on an FDD. We have a franchising track on if you want to make the switch from being a franchisee to a franchisor. So again, it's getting pretty specific. And that one is hosted by, we have one is the time to franchise, which means, say you're a corporate run restaurant and you're deciding to get into it. And that's hosted by the CEO of the IFA. So there's a lot of
I saw, see, now that's funny because I saw he was attending, and actually the IFPTA works with the IFA at their national conference, trying to bring, food and beverage tech to that. So It's great when you have industry spokespeople that are coming out, and being able to also represent an industry segment. And franchising, that is their domain, and that's what they do. And so that's good. But, in your own world, and I didn't know this, by the way, till you and I started talking, and until I talked with some other folks within your organization that I've known for years last year, I didn't actually understand the larger organization that your publications are part of, because they also put on catering summits, if I remember. There's a hotel one in there. And, if you start looking at revenue management, boy, that's a key term used in the hotel industry. Are you able to pull some expertise from other areas and other programs that are done, within your company?
Yeah. So what you're referencing there is 2 years ago, we became part of WTWH Media. Before that, QSR and FSR were known as Food News Media, which was owned
Right.
by Webb Howell for 25 or whatever amount of years it was. And so, yes, now we're part of a larger media organization that has engineering publications, robotics. Chef to Chef is a show that I think you were glancing
Yep.
there. That's about resort chefs and that category. And then we have a C-Store publication that also has events at C-Store Decisions. So yeah, I mean, and we all share the same events team, so that's part of the synergy there as well. In terms of being able to pull expertise, we did do that last year a little bit with some robotics programming we had when I talked to some of those guys at a larger company event that we had. But we're pretty much staying in our own restaurant lane.
Mm-hmm.
I think we learn from each other and some of the successes they've had, on the Chef to Chef conference in particular. There are things that we do that are similar, but really we're kind of making this in our own view of how we think it should be. And it's totally unique in the structure of the 4 different keynotes,
Right.
for example, which is, that's not something we do at any other event. And it is a lot to do it that way, to have an opening and closing keynote each day. But we really do want to give you just a conference that we feel is worth coming to.
Well, and you can bring it together, and it gives something for people to talk about when they go off to the receptions and they go off to the dinners and things, and then it gives them something to look forward to make sure they show up on time. So I get that. Before we take a quick break, you also last year, I got the opportunity to go to this, had the Women in Restaurant Leadership Whirl that had a reception there. And now I believe you have a separate conference. But the IFBTA's Lauren Selman was actually on a podcast that I watched 2 weeks ago in this, which I thought was, very interesting just to hear, the perspective of what's going on. So clearly that is something that you're keeping here at this, but you've broken out into its own conference.
Yeah, so Lauren is one of our advisory board members, so a little shout out to her involvement and help from the very start of it. But yeah, so what happened there, it's a very interesting story. I do not really remember why I decided last year to put that on the agenda. It was just a panel originally. I had a women in leadership panel, and what ended up happening during my speaker outreach was that everybody wanted to be on that panel. I felt kind of bad telling people no, given the topic. And so suddenly I had 8-9 people on this panel, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'll do a round table. We'll make them in a circle and we'll have everyone just kind of participate. And then that just kept getting bigger and I kept getting more requests to be on it. And then I had this idea, let's do it in a sort of like a networking format. So 25 to 50 people in one room. It'll be kind of like a value add if you show up. And that 25 to 50 people became 75 people. That 75 people became 100 people. That became 155 people.
Yep.
And so we ended up putting it in this separate room, basically where it was like a cocktail reception.
You did. And by the way, I should point out that, and don't tell anybody about this, but I actually had to sneak in because I didn't have an invite. And then one of your sponsors actually invited me. Even if Lauren from the IFBTA sits on your advisory board, that was a tough thing to get into unless I had an invite.
Yeah, well, so at the time there was no advisory board, so she didn't have the hookup she has now. But yeah, it was. So
really... wait. If they're doing a reception this year, do I have to go to Lauren and ask her if I can get in?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Well, last year's got so we had that happen a lot where people were trying to sneak in because they got to the hotel and they heard about it and they wanted to go naturally, and so we actually had to get a bouncer at the door because the hotel started to freak out on us about the 155 capacity of the room because it wasn't that big of a room. And so I go into the room, during the reception, which you snuck into. And, it was good. There was no structure to it. And, we had this idea we were going to have a few women who I had reached out to from before just kind of say something. And they ended up not wanting to do that because they were like, look, we've been listening to people all day. Let's just drink, Danny. And I said, okay, sounds good. But then I got feedback from the floor of that event from a lot of women. It was basically two things. It was one, where is the programming? We would like, some education or to hear from some of the women in the industry. And I was like, well, it says cocktail reception on the door, but okay. And then the second part was just, there's a mixture of people in here, which is great, but like, how do we make this kind of more defined in what it is? And I said, okay. And and when I ended up leaving that and going into our 2024 planning, the thing that jumped to my mind was this reception that we did that was so popular from a demand perspective. Can we spin this into something larger? And that's where the event in Nashville came to be. And we launched it in 5 months. And it ended up going from an event to a entirely new vertical for us here. And so it has its own editor now. It has its own properties for media, podcasts, so on and so forth, webinars. And it's become almost like a organization. And so, yeah, we're going to continue to bring back this version of it, which this year is 220 people instead of 155 people.
221.
Well, I think it's actually 225, so you'll make it 226.
There you go.
But yeah, this is going to be, so now it'll be kind of like a satellite.
I am going to tell them when I get to the door that you invited me.
I don't know if they're going to care. But we'll try. So yeah, it's going to be good, and it is a little bit more focused this year. We're going to do a networking bingo and with the sponsor who is Olo, and so it's taken on a life of its own, and it's really become something that I'm personally very invested in and proud that we were able to do to the level that we have thus far. But there's still so much to figure out.
Well, we're invested in that as well, and. Before we take the quick little break and just switch a subject here, I realize that we should just make sure that people know the exact dates and the location in Atlanta coming up.
Yeah, so the welcome reception is September 3rd, and then the actual programming and all that fun stuff is the 4th and the 5th. So on the morning of September 4th at, I believe, 9 o'clock will be the opening keynote, which is what we're calling the Restaurant Brands International Roundtable. It's going to be very, very unique. I'm still not entirely even sure how it's going to go, but it's going to be myself and the president of Firehouse Subs, Burger King, Tim Hortons US, and Popeyes all together at once. So that will be the kickoff day. And it will be in Atlanta.
And you said restaurant brands because those are all brands underneath RBI.
Correct. So we call it the RBI Roundtable for short. But yeah, September 3rd, technically, in Atlanta. And registration is, I do not exactly know when it will close. I believe you can do it on site, but the price, obviously, they charge for that. But it is going very intensely these last 3 weeks. So we will see where it ends up. But I hope you're all joining us already, but if you're not, just let me know. We'll see if we can help you out.
There you go. So let's just take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and switch subjects, and you're going to need to have your editorial hat on.
Sounds good.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
We're back from the break, and I'm Rob Grimes with the IFBTA, and I'm with Danny Klein, who is the editorial director of QSR and FSR, and we've been talking about the QSR Evolution and the FSR Next Gen Restaurant Summit, both coming up on the 3rd of September at the Marriott in downtown Atlanta, and we've been talking about that program, and I want to switch gears a little bit because in the first part of this conversation, we were talking about how do you come up with the subjects. And one of the things that you said was that you are taking a different approach in the industry. And it probably comes from your editorial background, but you're putting content first. You're coming up with the subjects, and yes, you have high sponsorship and people who are investing from the supplier community, but their say so in the subjects is actually coming from the editorial community. So since you spend so much time personally, and we talked about how do you predict the future in November for something that's going to occur in September, since you're doing that personally, and we're technology, right? So what are the
Yeah.
trends and things that you think are coming as an editor in your conversations with people out there on the tech space?
Yeah, the tech space, it's always a complicated conversation. I'm trying to, I've always looked at the technology since I've been here, and I'm coming up on I'm over 9 years now. It seems to come in these waves of things and like eras of how you want to define it. So when I got here, and I think you would agree with this, the restaurant technology space it was well behind retail for sure,
Absolutely.
but a laggard in general, and kind of a laggard on purpose, because so many operators have looked at running restaurants as this gut feel concept of, I know what's going on inside my restaurants. I need to be there, and I see and I react accordingly. And I don't want technology to kind of present this theater of experience that gets in the way of hospitality. And so then COVID happened, and you ended up having this sort of race to a lot of the things that people were resistant to because they had no choice but to get in front of customers. So delivery, they started to stand it up in independent restaurants and all these different type of things. But then when that dust settled, and this is kind of where I thought we were a year or two ago, you had a very disconnected technology landscape. You had too many tools that didn't speak to each other, that people were uncertain which ones to keep. It was too expensive. And at the end of the day, the truth was they had too much data, and no one
By the
knew
way,
what
there
to
was
do
a
with it.
reason for that. It's because they selected the systems under silos and under
Right.
pressure. And so they weren't necessarily thinking about holistically how they were going to fit together. But at the same time, new opportunities and ways of doing business opened up that they really new day parts, if you want to look at it that way, that they hadn't thought about before. So, but now you got all this data from all these different places. And so continue on, because you're right on with what
Well,
got us there, right?
right. I think that's what you're saying is accurate. So now what we're at is we're at this almost like this optimization era of trying to be less about innovation, in my opinion. You don't have as much in terms of like something you haven't heard about, or this buzzy, crazy robotics, thing, or AI on a form that's making really big headlines. But what you do have is now people trying to find unified solutions to real problems. And I don't know what to call this new era, but what I will say is that I think the technology right now is getting to a point. It's getting more affordable. The restaurants are finding out that they can use AI in forms that are maybe less, sexy than voice ordering taking, to help them in the back of the house, the machine learning to figure out
Right.
how to make sense of all this information that's coming through, that isn't just also about the consumer and understanding them better, but it's also just about the equipment, trying to predict the peaks. I think some good examples of this is like you listen to a First Watch calls now, and the reality is they still live by that concept of, you don't want technology to get too much in the way, but they've got KDS now, they've got pay at the table. So they're using technology on a very pinpointed way to kind of address specific friction points. And so I think there's a benefit to it.
There's this concept of deja vu out there, right? When you see things. Now, I'm going to guess that I may have been around a little bit longer than you in this particular space. However, you see things come back around, and you're actually bringing up some rather interesting points, that it doesn't matter the age gap or whatever it is, that these points are coming back around. So I'm going to point out a couple of things that you just said that I think we should probably bullet and highlight, because I don't want to overlook them. So first of all, you started out by talking about how in the past 9 years ago, we might have been laggards and people were sitting out there. We were behind the retail industry. I would agree with you 100%. And I used to tell people that the reason why we were behind is because retail could do, 50 lane, 25 lanes in a grocery store or something like that. They'd pay for the technology. Plus they had a lot of, higher volume and things that they were doing. Okay. So we get that. But today, 2 weeks ago, I did a podcast with somebody who was telling me that the retail industry is learning from food service, hence the Food Service Innovation Zone at the National Retail Federation show, which we work with them on. So I'm right on. Then you started talking about data. And by the way, you used the term machine learning. Okay. So we could also use the term big data.
Yeah.
We could use a lot of terms out there, right? And you're right. There's a lot of information out there. People don't know what to do with it. But your first watch example is also something that's critically important, that we also see a lot of tech entrepreneurs coming up, creating solutions for our industry that never worked in the industry, or it's a solution looking for a problem. I think what you're saying is that the first watch guys, are taking a different approach. They know they need the technology. They have the problems and the challenges. What can they do with it? And so technology becomes the enabler. And then the last thing I'd say to you is, and this is going to be the fun part, we're not going to solve this today, but between now and the time I see you in Atlanta, I'm going to be thinking about this one. We do need to come up with some terms for the generations, or where we are in the evolution of technology. Because I don't say AI anymore, meaning, artificial intelligence. I say either actionable insights or actionable information. I don't really care, the computer behind it. But I think you're onto something that we should put our heads together and try to figure out what the where we are in evolution, where are we right now? So those are some points I bring out to you.
Well, what I'll tell you is I just finished writing our drive-thru study, which we've been doing for, 25 years. And I've written now, I guess, 4 or 5 of them. I kind of lose track. And what's fascinating about the drive-thru to me, and it's obviously partly because I work at QSR, and this is just on my brain, but the drive-thru in particular really crosses this intersection if you want to look at consumers and how they interact with technology, because it's something that's been around for so long and did not change for decades. I mean, it's kind of like the point of sale a little bit in restaurants. And when that changed was such a revolution and really hasn't changed since for the most part. But the drive-thru, if you want to take a view at how consumers are starting to change, you really can always begin there. And so when I was looking at and talking to operators for this year's study, compared to say 4 years ago, what was the key 4 years ago? Like, let's go pre-COVID a little bit. It was speed, right? That's all you were really talking about. The faster you got, the more transactions you can get, in different ways that you can flow that traffic and get through the window as fast as possible. But what's become important now is actually not so much speed at the way that it's clocked, but it's the perception that can be achieved through the overall technology pieces. It's almost an accuracy play. So the menu boards, the digital confirmation, which looks like your cell phone, right? It looks more like now, if you're like, here's a good example, like AI voice ordering. You know what it never does? Repeat back to you what you ordered. Because it can't really do that on a way that makes any sense to you in your normal digital life. So what you see instead is you see it pop up on the board in front of you, which is like if you went to Amazon, you ordered a bar of soap, you're sitting there, refreshing your email to wait for that confirmation. It's like we all need that confirmation. So you see that at the drive-thru now. It's a table stakes reality, right? You see these different pieces that start to work at the payment point, the hospitality doors, not needing necessarily to hand your card over to a human being. All these different things that happen throughout all of restaurant technology, to me, seem to happen at the drive-thru first. So that's kind of my way to look at it a lot, is I like to see, what's going on there.
Because they do. I mean, remote ordering, voice over IP, even if you look at the back. Yeah, there's so many, but is it really the drive-thru, or is the drive-thru really the thing that's going to transfer into your car and your automobile on the big screen? It's just taking the it's like a kiosk, right? It's just like taking the technology and putting it on your phone. Your phone is basically a kiosk. So, okay, I get that, online ordering. So, but it's interesting perspective to say that so I think if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that the drive-thru is the genesis of technology as it relates to taking orders and serving customers.
Yeah, and I think, and also just how you see it in other parts of people's lives. Your point there about the order ahead, if that technology had not become a part of most consumers' journeys, you would have never seen the so-called Chipotle, phenomenon, which is now dominating 80% of their growth, which is essentially a drive-through.
Which is
without
why a guy
talking to
can go to
anybody.
Starbucks and get $65 million of private jet to take him back and forth. And I
Right.
got that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's another thing. And like, this Chick-fil-A that I wrote about last week or whenever that was, it's got 4 lanes, 75 cars at once, 2 lanes that are dedicated to order ahead. It's got a conveyor belt system in terms of dropping the food down, which is like the Taco Bell Defy from a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, I've always found the drive-through to be a real reflection. And here's one last like consumer point on this is that we track the sort of the wait times in terms of consumer acceptance. And this has begun to flip in the last 3 years. And so people are now willing.
The wait time of consumer acceptance. What's
Yeah,
that
so
mean?
what they are willing to wait and where.
Oh,
So
okay.
for
I got it.
example, we've got this 6-minute point basically of where a consumer is willing to wait for you to take their order. That's like this little cliff that we have. But after that point, they're pretty open to waiting for actually a long time. So as long as you get their order taken, they don't really mind it, which is one of these Chick-fil-A effects, right? But what that signals to me is that people like, younger generations, all of us like to sit in our cars and look at our cell phones. So that was not always the case in the
Because
drive-through.
they got something else to do.
Right. So people now, you take your order, they'll sit and they'll kind of give you some leeway on the time. And that's a reflection of what technology has done in the palm of our hands that was simply not there 10 years ago. I mean, if you had people sitting in their cars just waiting, they had a real issue with it. So restaurants worked to address it. But now you've got order takers walking the line to get your order taken in 2 minutes, but then they could take their time to give you accurate
It's
food.
interesting that you say that. I mean, I wouldn't have thought about that, but that's a very interesting thought. So if you carry that thing forward, you said within the portfolio of companies you have, you do some C-store things. And the C-stores are struggling right now to figure out what happens when EV goes out there. What can we turn this real estate into? And of course, the natural thing is QSR. So let's go ahead and change it into QSR. But they struggled for years with what do we do with the period of time when somebody's at a gas pump, right? And all they're doing is sitting there. So they put the TVs in. Then they said, why don't we take orders? Well, that didn't really work very well. But now if somebody has to spend 20 minutes there charging up their car because it's a destination, they should be taking the study that you're doing and applying that to what can we do with the time? How long are they willing to wait? What do we have to do with beyond 6 minutes? What do we have to do with the rest? I mean, there's probably an opportunity out there.
Yeah, well, C-stores historically have always struggled to compete with drive-throughs. I mean, that is just something that they can't
Yeah, but
they
Sheets and
can't
people put
replicate.
drive-throughs in.
Yeah, they did. I mean, you're right. I mean, 7-Eleven has started to launch restaurant concepts.
Absolutely.
And then you,
They're partnering with restaurant concepts.
yeah, and then you look at like Buc-ee's, and it's basically
Ugh.
you know, it's a destination with a gas station wrapped around it. So I don't know that space too well, to be honest. I kind of stay within my silo, but yeah, they are always talking to each other in terms of trying to figure out, the amount of articles we wrote in the past about our C stores taking share from QSR is like endless. But the answer was usually not really. That's not to say that future doesn't exist. It definitely
Oh, our
does. But
grocery stores taking away from,
yeah,
when they're
right.
serving hot meals to go. Got it. Right. No, it actually ends up being more partnering, especially because we see all these restaurants getting into CPG and putting
Hmm.
things up on the shelf. Right. So it's an opportunity, but tech comes in there because the customer wants a seamless experience, whether it's in a C-store, grocery store, a pickup locker in a building. I mean, and by the way, your own show, I haven't gotten there yet, but I'll be there in a week and a half. And I bet you I see a majority of the exhibitors that are there and the sponsors are going to be tech companies.
Oh yeah. There are some 7-Eleven people coming too.
I
I just,
probably have seen them. Some of them came from the restaurant industry. I saw them at some conferences recently.
yeah, I think we have four of them attending just as attendees. But you're right, technology has become, I think, for anyone who goes to restaurant conferences, that is the bear share of vendors. And it's an interesting flip because I'm sure you could relate to this 5, 6, 7 years ago. It was mostly food companies who sponsored restaurant events.
Absolutely.
And now it is the majority of them are tech companies. It's an interesting phenomenon, but yeah, I think not a surprising one,
But
really.
I'd like to be really clear on what you said because those food companies are evolving as well in the tech. And, while you're not eating what Ecolab sells, okay, I get that. But
Yeah.
Ecolab invested in Flippy, right? Who knew that they were going to do that? And then you go take a look at the investments that PepsiCo and Coca-Cola make with their technology funds. And then you take a look at some of the food companies that are getting into vending. So they're evolving. I don't know, are they, then they take like sous vide cooking or take Middleby with robotics. So, in reality, even those traditional companies have evolved in the technology and they're bringing that forward as a standalone platform or is what they bring.
Yeah, no, I mean that's completely accurate. These all these parts of the industry right now can't exist without technology. I think that's what has changed, coming out of whatever craziness you want to call the last few years is there are not parts of your business that you run in, spite of tech. I met a lot of operators, especially in full service when I first started, who used to talk that way. It's not the case anymore. I mean, you do have experiential concepts who are really invested in not
Absolutely.
having that front and center, but they have it in the back of the house. I was on a webinar recently where James O'Reilly, the CEO of Ascent Hospitality,
Mm-hmm.
told everyone he was a back of the house technology geek. And a lot of people really liked it, but that was his whole thing was that it's not where he wants it to be yet in terms of he was essentially challenging the vendors listening to create back of the house technology that satisfies their need to
And that
allow
is that
them.
is a big
Yeah.
thing. That's where a lot of the automation is occurring, but it's not the sexy stuff because everybody focuses on writing the articles of the things that are customer facing. So
Right.
we get that,
That's
right?
exactly
Well,
that I
listen,
think
there's
is
there's
the
there's
key.
so many subjects that we could talk about here, and I'm now realizing we should have talked a lot sooner because you're bringing up some things I'd love to drill down into, and I think that there's an opportunity in the future, perhaps, to drill down into a few of these. Because when you have a conversation with somebody and you tee up the idea, you don't know where it's going to go, but you can say, "But what if we apply it this way or that way?" And I think some of the things that you're talking about today, we will see a year from now applied by the technology providers and some of the operators. And you got to have that inquisitive view of taking a look at it. So one more time, so people should come talk to you in person. They can talk to me in person. And if you want to sneak into a couple of events, you need to call him. So once again, you want to give us the details of QSR Evolution and FSR Next
Next
Gen
gen,
Restaurant Summit?
yeah, yes. Yeah, I mean it's dominating my brain at the moment. So if you do have questions about it, I think the best way to reach me is through email at dklein@wtwhmedia.com or just find me on LinkedIn, which is the only social platform I currently use at this
And
point in
how
my
do they
life.
register right now if they want last minute
Ye-
information and
Yeah,
registration?
yeah. So I mean, obviously you can come ask me directly, but also QSRevolutionconference.com and the Next Gen Restaurant Summit.com, I believe. Let me see if there's a conference in nextgenrestaurantsummit.com. You can register both on those pages. We'll have some emails going out this week. But yeah, we are definitely down the home stretch here. So
And then when they attend, they should attend the Women in Restaurant Leadership networking reception, and then they should
well,
attend the conference.
well, I will say about the reception, if you go to register, that is sold out. That's been sold out for 3 months. So you will not be able to do that.
Okay.
However, to your point, and this is a response to last year having that problem, you can go register for the separate event in Nashville, which is called womenleadrestaurants.com. That registration opened about 2.5 weeks ago. We did it kind of quietly. Mainly so that we can have it open while we're in Atlanta, but it's really going to ramp up following the event because my brain can only handle so many conferences at once.
Well, this is the season coming up, right? So this is what kicks it up.
Well, we tried to be at the front of that season. I know we're kind of second, I guess. But yes, I'm going to basically turn focus to the World Summit as we call it.
No, you stop wearing white on Labor Day, as my wife would tell me, I guess. So you're at the front of the season because Labor Day is like only a couple days before. So you're not second. I would see you as being first in the season. So Danny, the editorial director of QSR FSR, thank you so much, not only for joining me today in this conversation, but also including the IFBTA. I know I'm secondary to Lauren Selman, but okay. But including the IFBTA, is a partner and a participant in the upcoming event, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks in Atlanta.
Of course, we appreciate the partnership, and it'll be a crazy 2.5 days. So, thank you for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So this podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of technology within the food and beverage industries, providing thought leadership. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. Bottom line, the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share. So thank you for joining Courtney and me on this spotlight episode of Tech Bites, powered by the IFBTA and SageNet. I am Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.